your death, this nightmare may finally end. I'm better. I'm not the only hunter. How quick are you?
I've killed countless thousands. What's one more? Crush the intruder! No mercy! Justice! You are nothing! Face your door! Your sentence is death!
Time for Awakener level 8.
Did you really think this
I
would
did this
work?
before with one death, but I accidentally had YouTube playing in the background, so the audio is kind of screwed.
Destroying
So I'm gonna
you
do it
is
again.
as easy as flicking a pest.
No,
Stand up!
Kirak!
How boring and small.
You
I need my
want the
flasks to
Atlas?
be capped on res,
Take
so if
it.
either of these drop,
It's
I'll
yours. But
be very
Orius,
susceptible to dying.
Orius, I will burn to the ground.
Perhaps the suffering of my fellow citizens will finally
Hopefully that
stir.
won't happen because I got self-temp chains and lots of curse effect on top of being a Pathfinder.
What's this? A real talent. You've finally caught my attention. Die.
Your lives are meaningless!
And I'll let my righteous fire go down, I think. Or do I care? Yeah, I'll let it go down, why not?
Fury of the cosmos! Why resist?
The others found strength in their projections. They became reliant on it. I'm not so foolish. Die.
My mana is gone.
I have seen your
Die.
This city is nothing! Fury of the cosmos! Obliteration! Why resist? Creation itself! Rain of stars! Pointless!
than normal, or is that just my imagination?
Do you yet see the futility of your efforts?
Beyond, there is only horror. This city is nothing.
They must have done an update where he does more storms. I must be crazy, because I don't remember this. Him doing like 20 storms.
Why resist? Creation itself. Fury of the cosmos.
Threads of death, my heart. I am. You will long for
Non-existent. Die. Everlasting fire.
My mana is gone.
Is doomed.
Rest in peace. Yeah, my flasks were down right when he did that, so that was unfortunate. Have I not had my Harbinger either of this entire time? Amateur plays. That Harbinger I can pretty much have up full time if I'm self-temp chaining, and he gives me immunity to everything on top of... That was probably stupid. He gives me immunity to everything on top of 20% damage reduction. Okay, let's try to not die by just running into random stuff to begin with.
king.
Is everlasting fire. Beyond, there is only horror.
Oh, that was a waste.
Will long for
Non-existent. Silent. Everlasting fire.
Man. Hey guys, Captain Lance here. Hope you enjoyed the clips of me doing some boss fights and a little bit of clearing on a beach for going up to leading up to Drox. Real quickly, I'm going to go over the gear I use for this character and the passives and kind of the mechanics I'm using to build the character. So to start off, I'm using Self Curse, Temp Change with Shackles of the Wretched. This is everywhere in Headhunter builds to basically make it so that the buff effects from Headhunter last forever. I'm using it for the specific sake of making my flask effects, be able to keep them 100% uptime on boss fights, because if I'm mapping, then I'll have enough flash charges, it won't matter. But for boss fights, it's necessary to keep these all up 100% of the time, as well as keeping up Harbinger focus up 100% of the time. And it also is nice for Winter Orb, makes it last longer for like its deceleration down. So it's a good way to keep all those things up 100% uptime with basically just one item, well, two items. You need Calm's Roots and Shackles of the Wretched together. The reason for this is Calm's Roots They negate the bad effects of temporal change, which would be like moving around really slowly and not being able to cast very fast, because they have this modifier that says action speed cannot be modified to below base value. So you need to pick up these. This is mandatory. This is mandatory. They're both not too expensive. If you can afford it, I'd recommend getting a corruption with spell crit or cast speed on these, along with elemental weakness would be good too, but those are quite more expensive than the cast speed are. And with the Calm's Roots, damage pen would be the top tier enchant if you can't get that. There's a few other decent enchants that I would look for. Next up, because we are self-cursing temp chains, we want the temp chains to be pretty effective. The mod on temp chains that we want to increase is other effects on cursed enemies expire 40% slower. So we want to basically make that last longer and longer. So with this, it says 50% increased effective curses on you. It makes our temp chains super effective. So basically, instead of it being things expire 40% slower, it's 60% slower. So imagine for every second, say you have something that lasts 4 seconds, for it to expire 60% slower, picture that every second only 0.4 seconds go by. So it's actually 0.4 times 10. So that's really 10 seconds that need to go by, more or less, for a 4-second effect to go off. So say you have something like Harbinger of Focus. That's this bad boy right here. It lasts 4 seconds. It has an 8-second cooldown, and the way it works is it has 4 seconds where I'm getting the effect of it, and then 4 seconds where I don't. More or less, since I have this self-curse temp change, it'll last for 10 seconds. So by the time it gets to that 8-second cooldown mark, I'll have reapplied it, and therefore I get 100% uptime on a Harbinger of Focus skill, which basically gives me immunity to stun, immunity to elements, that means bleeding, that means poison, that means shock, freeze, ignite, all that stuff, and it also gives me 20% damage reduction. So it's like a better version of a Fortify, and that's on top of the fact I am getting Fortify by shield charging around. I basically have a 4-link to Curse on hit, Temporal Change, Shield Charge, and Fortify. So I shield charge into a pack, I get my temp chains up to make everything last longer, and I have Fortify, all that good stuff. Next up, the other reason I was going self-curse temp chains is to keep up my damage flask 100% of the time in boss fights. Because with Pathfinder you can mostly do that, but with self-curse temporal chains it's more of a guarantee, especially if the boss fights. It's a guarantee except for maybe Awakener or fights where they have long immunity phases. So for Awakener, since he goes up into the cloud or whatever, I can't self-curse myself, and I will, for a couple of seconds of the fight, I will be down on flasks, and you just gotta kind of play those safe. Either walk away and let your flasks recharge, or don't play it safe and do what I did and acquire a death by not really waiting to get more full flasks and just going balls to the wall. But basically what these get me is I am Pathfinder, so I get a lot of flask effect on these passives here. They all give me 5, 5, 5, so it's 20% flask effect, plus the other major nodes, which all give nice effects. Like this one makes me regenerate charges, and with temporal changes, it regenerates more charges than I lose by using the flasks. This one gives me 10 pen. If I used a fizz skill like Blade Vortex, which also is really nice with duration, then it could benefit from the 10% gain as fizz. I was originally going to use like Divine Ire or Blade Vortex, but then I wasn't really liking the feeling of playing with those as much as I was Winter Orb, but those skills would both be good with this build. Nature's Adrenaline is just nice for movement speed and attack speed. That helps your shield charge speed go and move around maps faster. I originally was over here for 5% flask effect, but I decided I'd rather be able to just get a bunch of flask charges from dealing critical strikes too, just to be 100% sure I'm generating charges when I need to, rather than just have 5% flask effect, which isn't that big of a difference from what I have now. Other important things I'm using is, you'll see I'm using Indigon. So the biggest important thing about this thing is non-instant mana recovery from flask is also recovered as life. So whatever I get from this flask, as far as mana is concerned, I get it as life. Now you'll see the effect right here. Say I pull Righteous Fire, instantly kills me, right? But I press 1 for my mana flask, it heals me up pretty good. Now I didn't have my ruby flasks, which basically that plus my Wise Oak cap me on resistances. So with both those flasks up, you know, this is how it looks. I'll lose life kind of like that, more or less. But if I put on my mana flask plus those, I can run Righteous Fire in my build fairly easily, because the degen just doesn't really compete with those, more or less. It will if I have both my flasks down and I have no resistances. For example, if I was playing a minus max map, so if I was playing like something with minus 12 maximum resistances, that would be like if I had just my Ruby Flask up, I will still regen through that. So you can play minus max maps, no problem with these with this kind of setup. Okay, moving on. Coward's Legacy also gives us the you count as low life if you're cursed by vulnerability. It curses you with vulnerability. Now, that curse is super deadly, 50% increased curse effect, so you need a way to basically make it so it doesn't affect you. And the way you can do this is getting a Watcher's Eye that says, while affected by determination, you're unaffected by vulnerability, basically. So I picked up one with the Zealotry mod for enemies take 10% increased damage while on consecrated ground. That's because I arbitrarily chose to put Zealotry in my build. More or less, if you can't afford an Ol's Uprising for Determination reserves no mana, I would end up going for an Essence Worm in your build. I would drop Zealotry here, so you'd swap out something like this. You'd pick up a good amulet, like just something with life, mana, global critical strike multiplier, something like that. You grab those types of stuff, resistances, and then you'd throw your determination in here, and then maybe like depending on what skill you're using. If you're using a Fizz skill, Herald of Ash. If you're using Winter Orb like I am, maybe Herald of Ice, something like that, more or less. So, because this is a 1x to 2x item, if you can't afford that, Essence Worm is fine. Throw your determination in there. Still get the Watcher's Eye with the unaffected by vulnerability. That's not too expensive. And you'll be able to get low life, which gives you 30% more spell damage. On top of that, Indigon is basically, the more mana I spend, you'll see stuff starts to cost me more and more. And eventually I can't regen it fast enough, but my damage just goes up, way up. So it's for basically every 200 mana you spend recently, you get an increased mana cost and an increased spell damage cost. So it allows you on the tree to not really pick up spell damage. Instead, you just end up picking up a lot of crit and crit multi. So it basically serves a dual purpose. Makes you get high damage, and you can kind of snapshot that damage with stuff like Blade Vortex and Winter Orb with the increased duration from temp change from these gloves. Next up are flask choices. If you use a Fizz skill, instead of like the Wise Oak and Dying Sun, I'd recommend a Taste of Hate and Itziri's Promise. If you're using a skill like I am with projectiles and that's all cold damage, you want a Wise Oak for the pen, a Dying Sun for the extra projectiles. The Bottled Faith, really, Diamond Faith will do you just about as much damage. Frankly, I don't think I have enough crit for this to be much more competitive than this is. I just had the currency laying around, and I thought, hey, if I'm going for really abusing flasks, I might as well abuse the best one. But at the end of the day, Diamond Flask is almost as much damage. Also, your mana flask, it needs to be an enduring flasks, and you really should go for the crit chance mod on it, crafted on. Another thing I'd recommend is you divine mana flasks. This is the most efficient mana per second you can get. Eternal mana flask is technically slower. The reason for this is on the flask it'll say you recover this amount of mana over this many seconds. So the way you figure it out is, say you have a calculator like this, you just pull it up. Except I don't have it on display capture. Okay, there it is. So you pull up a calculator, you go over to this, you look, it's 1736 over 3.8. So you divide it by 3.8. This is how much base mana it's giving you per second. And that's basically the highest you can get compared to a eternal mana flask. This one's 2160 over 5.3. Again, you go to the calculator, 2160 over 5.3. It's only 470, so it's about a what is that, 10% increase in mana recovery, more or less. But basically, say its base is a 500 or whatever, I'm getting a ton of mana recovery on the tree. You'll see it'll be notes like this where it'll say increase mana recovery from flasks. So instead of like 500, it's like 1,000, but then I have a bunch of increase flask effect, which kind of doubles that more or less. So they're multipliers of each other. So rather than 1,000, couple hundred or whatever, it's like close to 2,000 recovered per second, and that's why my righteous fire can be sustained by just the mana flask alone. I also am grabbing Mom. Majority of the time, I'll put my ores back on. Majority of the time, I have 1,008 mana up. So more or less, a lot of the times when you get hit, it'll be like you're getting hit for 6.3k rather than just 5.3k. If I wasn't running Righteous Fire, I'd have a hit maximum of 7k, and you combine that with Fortify and the 20% damage of reduction of Unshattered Will, and this build actually ends up being pretty tanky. But most of the time, I choose to take the extra damage from Righteous Fire, because 38% more damage. I mean, it's pretty good stuff. You lose 1,000 top end EHP to get hit by, but having that damage just feels really good, especially when you can afford to do it, and it doesn't matter too much. Like, it doesn't hurt your build that much. All myself degen. Trying to think if there's stuff I haven't really covered. On your weapon, you pretty much want to pick up crit chance for spells, cast speed, global critical strike multiplier, and a cold level spells, or just level to all spells. That's stuff you're looking for in your one-hander. Can be a wand, can be in a dagger, can be in a scepter. Those are pretty much the mods you want to look for damage, more or less. For ring, I chose to go with Malachi's Artifice. This is simply to be reach top end damage. If you want to have a more tankier build with less damage, you just pick up a rare ring with life, mana, and resistances. But I chose this one specifically for getting minus 50 res on enemies. So pretty much whenever I cast my Orb of Storms in here, it'll take away 50 cold res of the enemies I'm fighting. It's super useful. It's a big damage booster. I also have Frost Bomb, so I do Frost Bomb and this, and that's minus 75 resistances for bosses I'm fighting. Super important for damage. You definitely want that in the build. I also go for Quicksilver that has the Adrenaline mod and the Alchemist mod. It's a shorter flask time, but it doesn't even matter because we have duration from Pathfinder, we have the temp chains, all that stuff. You can keep this up 100% time in boss fights, and it just makes you really fast. I go to 145% move speed, so it's a very fast moving character. Feels really good to play. This is the best in slot for you right here, is a flask like this. Trying to think if there's anything gear-wise I forgot to mention. Oh, for the chest piece, I just have an Arcane Surge chest with 100 life. The intelligence isn't really doing much for me. The regen 1% life, that's not a big deal for me. I did craft on 8% increased life, so this is basically a chest with 3 mods. You can just craft this with pristine and pristine and etheric fossils, and then that'll be kind of a good 6.5 link, because level 1 Arcane Surge is like half a link, more or less. For damage, I have Elemental Focus, Winter Orb, Greater Multiple Projectiles, Energy Leech. I'm always leeching with Righteous Fire up, so you always get the 38% more damage from this. Infused Channeling, and Slower Projectiles. I didn't really check if Conk Effect is actually more damage or not. Frankly, I forgot about it up until this point, but Conk Effect might be a better damage link here than Slower Projectiles. Also, when I'm mapping, I swap out Elemental Focus for increased strikes. This basically makes it so you freeze in all the packs. It makes it a lot safer mapping experience, and it's fun to hear all the shatters. I also don't map with Frost Bomb. I just have my portal in there, so I can cast portal whenever I want to leave the map. But for bossing, I use both these gems. So I think that's pretty much it for gearing. I don't think I missed anything really. For the passive tree, you'll see basically I grab every flask node on the tree. I don't think there's a flask node I don't take, more or less. Yeah, I grab all of them. Any flask nodes. But since I decided to go mom this route, or mind over matter, I ended up pathing basically to a lot of mana nodes with flasks, as well as life nodes. So this is basically the path I take. I grab life, mana, mana flasks, life and flasks, life and flask, mana and flasks, life to mom right here, which is pretty important. And then I grab spell damage crit, life and mana, mana recovery rate in flasks. Come over here, grab pain attunement for 30% more damage. Mana and flasks. Come over here, grab life and crit. I grab life and crit, more crit, more crit. These are probably like the last nodes you end up grabbing. These ones right here, probably the least valuable to the build. So when you're like, I don't know, by level 80, you won't have these nodes and you won't have these nodes. I'd get everything else first probably, because all the other nodes are more valuable on the tree, more or less. Also, probably went over this ascendancy, but you grab Nature's Boon first. Next I'd grab Veteran Boyer, and then to Nature's Adrenaline to Master Surgeon. Those are the flasks in the order I'd take them in. That's the gist of the build. I hope you guys liked it. Also, okay, I guess we should go over gems. Or gems, not gems, jewels, because I grab a decent amount. I grab 1, 2, 3, 4, but one of them's a Watcher Eye. But anyways, for the jewels, you pretty much want to look for crit multi and fixing your resistances and life, if you can get life. Cast speed's also decent, but I found with too much cast speed, I would proc Indigon too fast for my mana reserved, and then I wouldn't be able to cast too much. So really, the best things you want to look for is multi and life and resistances if you need to figure those out. And the one last thing I should say is triple balancing your Wise Oak is pretty worth it, I would say, just because you can get pretty much just like 16% damage reduction for every element. You only get 15 pen plus 50% effect, so it's like 23 pen or whatever. So you definitely want to make sure your cold resistances, or your cold resistance, is the highest uncapped when you have your flasks up. But it's nice to have triple capped, or triple, like matching them all to 117 or whatever resistance you end up. It's nice to have a match if you can for the reduction in damage to all those elements. It makes you a lot more tanky. Easy way to do that is pretty much actually it's not really easy. It's kind of like a algebra, more or less. You pretty much have to figure out how to get everything within kind of 10 resistances based on what you are with the flasks up, and then you would buy a Malachi's Artifice based on the specific lightning resistance you need to get in that range, and then you can bless or divine your other items to get your resistances up or lower to kind of match them. But that's the gist of the character. I would kind of recommend it. I think it's pretty good, but it is expensive if you want to go for stuff like Bottled Faith and Ol's Uprising and Coward's Legacy. Those are the more expensive items. Really, I would just buy a 6-link. That's an int chest, and I would just craft with Pristine and Etheric. Shouldn't take too long to hit Arcane Surge. And Unshattered Will, just buy the pieces and make your own shield, or if you can afford it, just buy a good roll. Indigon's also pretty cheap. The Winter Orb enchant is not necessary for this to do endgame content. That's the gist of it. Hope you guys like the build. This has been Captain Lance. I'm out.